Welcome back to Everard Junction. You join me near the completion of a very long, tedious job, but something I've been thinking about doing for a few months now. So what I've been doing is rebuilding the Fiddle yard. This is the storage side of the railway. So basically you can park lots of different trains in here, and then they're readily available during a running session, so you can run one train into the yard and swap it out for another one. Much better than just keeping everything in boxes or in storage. I like to try and keep everything on the Fiddle yard if possible. So I've completely relaid the entire Fiddle yard, and I've also changed all of the point work to something a little bit smoother using the Pico Streamline track, and I've also changed all of the curves that lead into both ends of the yard to something again a bit smoother. Changing the point work changed the spacing and geometry of the track I already had laid in the Fiddle yard, so all of it has had to come up, and every single bit of it has had to be relayed with new dropper wires soldered in. And as you can see, there's now an awful lot of track. Changing all of the geometry of the track and making things smoother has also meant that I've had to add a 120mm extension to the rear of the Fiddle yard, and you can see it really does take things right to the limit of the roof of the house to add the necessary tracks I need to store trains on the outer loop. As I said earlier, this is something I've been thinking about doing for quite a while, and I'll explain why. Over the past few months, I've been having a little bit of intermittent running issues / derailments with a few items of stock, and slowly over those months I've been thinking about improving the track in the Fiddle yard, making things more streamlined to avoid these derailments. Most of my stock ran absolutely fine through the Fiddle yard. It was a mixture of second radius, third radius and fourth radius curves using the Pico set track curved points. However, there were some items of stock that really struggled with that tight sort of curvature and those tricky points. First item is the Hornby Sea Cow on the right hand side of the screen. That wagon ran okay before, but when I converted it to use the Hunt magnetic couplers that bring them closer together, I noticed that their performance was significantly reduced when operating on tight curves. So this should mean that I can now run that train without any further problems. Behind it you can see two very long cargo wagons. These are two different types. One is made by Hellion and the other one is made by Revolution Trains. Both of these are very long vehicles, and they too did struggle on the tight Pico set track curved points. And then finally, the latest addition to the layout, the Cavalex TEA Class A tank wagon, also derailed frequently on the curved points. If you saw the previous video, you'll be familiar with these wagons and their tendency to derail on those tight second radius curves and set track points. I spoke with Cavalex Models after the previous video regarding the derailment of these wagons, and they informed me that to get the best performance out of these, you really need to run them on third radius or greater. As my existing Fiddle yard was using second radius and those second radius Pico set track curved points, that was why I was getting the derailments. They just couldn't handle that tight curve. The reason for the derailment is the brake shoe detail that you can see here fouls on this piece of detail here, which forms part of the braking system on the real wagon. As you can see, if this piece of plastic is to swing in this direction, it's going to crash into this piece of plastic here, which ultimately restricts the curves that the model can go around. Cavalex have advised me that if you cut off this piece of detail with a sharp knife, then the model will be able to go around second radius curves. I've tried it on one wagon in my collection and can confirm that the bogies certainly swing a lot further, and it shouldn't be a problem with second radius curves. As I mentioned in the previous video, the wagons are quite closely coupled from the box, which is a nice feature, but if you're going to make this modification to go around the second radius curves, then I would suggest perhaps considering fitting some slightly longer couplings just to avoid the buffers from crashing into each other and getting caught up on those second radius curves, especially if you've got an S-bend where you go from a left into a right. I think these wagons will still struggle a little bit with their quite tight couplers, so it's just something to be mindful of if you decide to modify them to go around tight corners. So with the Cavalex TEA requiring modification to run through my Fiddle yard and the existing problems I was having regarding derailments of this stock over here, I decided to go ahead and rebuild the Fiddle yard, as it was something I was already contemplating. And then when I took delivery of the Cavalex wagons and discovered they too couldn't manage the tight corners, I thought, well, there you go. That sealed the deal, and then I decided to go ahead, rip all of this up and redo the point work just to get much more reliable running. And then in future, if I get some more rolling stock that's just as well detailed as the Cavalex wagon, and you know, it might have issues with tight corners or whatever, then I'm not going to suffer from that anymore. So hopefully this has future-proofed the layout a little bit with regards to future releases. It should cure the existing derailments I'm having with this stock over here, and now my Cavalex wagons don't need to be cut up and modified to negotiate the fiddle yard. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the point work and those curves leading into the yard. So as you can see, the point work is now quite a bit different. I've used the Pico Streamline range of points, which are quite a bit more gentle than the Set Track range of points that they also make. The curved points I was using previously were part of that Set Track range, and you can see just how tight they are. They are quite aggressive. So you're asking a lot from long wheelbase wagons and highly detailed rolling stock. Here's one of the short streamline points, and if I put one of the curved points that I was previously using over the top, you can see how much more aggressive the curved point is in its curvature. Even though this is still considered the short point, it's a great deal more gentle. So of the 4 tracks that run around the layout, all 4 of those split once they enter the yard. Each one goes for a freeway point, and then I've used some of the short points in various positions to create a little bit of a head shunt here, so I can store a locomotive or two, which is very nice, not a feature I've had before. And you can see how it then just branches out, in this case, into 4 tracks. Each of the 4 main tracks that runs around the layout splits into 4 tracks in the fiddle yard, with the exception of the rearmost track, which splits into 5. Fortunately, I had a little bit of extra space there, so I've made use of it. All of these smooth points do mean that the track in some cases is separated a little bit further from how I had it before. Basically the distance side to side between each track has to be a bit greater, and because of that I was going to lose some very valuable storage space by changing the point work over. So I've also added that 120mm extension to the baseboards at the back there, taking things right up to the roof of the house, which has allowed me to add extra tracks to make up for the shortfall in capacity. So now each of the tracks has 4 storage locations, with the exception of the rearmost one having 5. So I've actually added an additional 3 tracks over what I had previously, so I should be able to store a few extra trains. Leading into the yard, you can see we've got some nice smooth curves now going back out onto the scenic part of the layout. These are still set track curves, but they're now 4th radius, which is considerably more gentle than what I was using before. And then you can also see, because of the more gentle curves, you can see how far that rear track has to go, and it basically took it right to the edge of the previous table that I had, hence the need to add the extension, so it can split up into multiple storage sidings and still make that outer track useful. It does mean each siding is a bit shorter than how they were previously, which is going to knock probably about 2 wagons off of the length of my longest freight trains. So not too much of an issue there, and I'm really happy that I've been able to add the extra storage tracks. So although the longest train will get about 2 wagons shorter, I can now add several more in storage. And again, on the far side of the layout by the station, as we move into the fiddle yard, most of the sidings would have started by this point here. You can see the old holes for the dropper cables, so all of the sidings would have started by this point. So you can see that they're not as long as they used to be, but I'd rather have more reliable running than a long train that derails constantly. So there you go. It's been quite a big project, and the access to some of it has been quite difficult as well. I didn't bother to film any of it, as all I'm doing is just adding a bit of basic carpentry to the rear of the baseboards and then just laying a load of Code 100 tracks, so it wasn't exactly exciting stuff. With regards to the last video, it is possible to run the Cavalex TEA wagon on second radius curves. You just need to perform the modification that I discussed earlier if you do not have the luxury of making the tracks on your layout a little bit more gentle in curvature. Cavalex have also informed me that minimum radius information for future models is going to be added to the box or included on a slip of paper inside, so that if we have a model that's not compatible with second radius curves, for example, we won't be surprised. So I'll go ahead now and get some trains back into the Fiddle yard, get things back to how they used to be, so we can enjoy running the layout again. First up, 47-190, hauling a rake of grubby TEAs. Allocated to the petroleum sector, this 47 looks right at home hauling this grubby train. Next we have split box 37-104 on a Speedlink service. Headed east, this class 37 hauls a mixture of scrap, palletised goods and domestic coal. One of my favourites, 58-014, takes charge of this domestic coal train. Class 58s were all allocated to the coal sector and spent much of their working lives hauling these heavy trains. Already running 20 minutes late, this Class 117 departs Everard Junction running all stations to Paddington. At standing room only already, this sets to be an uncomfortable commute into the capital. BR's latest development, the Class 60, gets ready to take this tanker train further west. The class promises to keep BR competitive as we head into the 1990s. Heavy stone traffic is behind 56049 today. Despite Yeoman having a dedicated fleet of Class 59s, not all of these trains can be hauled by them. Class 56s remain a regular sight on these workings. 47322 works a Speedlink train west. The cargo in this train includes pet food, bottled water and bags of fertiliser. Another split box, Class 37, heads out to collect ballast ready for overnight maintenance. Many of these workings are handled by Class 33 and Class 37s. Express trains are powered by the iconic high-speed train. This service wastes no time as it speeds towards Paddington. (47-828) powers this cross-country service from Birmingham. Air-conditioned coaches make for a comfortable journey into Paddington. Running very late and diverted onto the main lines, 47209 rushes this Freightliner service towards Acton Yard. 47209 is part of the distribution subsector and is often seen hauling containers and palletised goods. (50-046) takes charge of this secondary NSE service. Class 50s are well suited to the stop-start nature of these intense trains and provide a reliable service over their Class 47 classmates. Dirty 47474 heads west with a lengthy parcels train. Much of the rolling stock in this train needs a serious clean. Another Class 47 also heads west with a Network Express train. It passes Everard Junction at speed en route to Reading, the first stop on this service. Class 52 D1062 hauls this Pullman Rail Enthusiast Special. The ends of the station platform are crowded as photographers wait for the Western to speed through. So hopefully that silly little montage gave you an idea of the sort of trains that I like to try and run on the layout. They are somewhat authentic. I do try and create something sort of reasonably accurate for the sort of era and region that I'm trying to portray. So most of these rakes you would have seen in one form or another around the Western region during the late 1980s. The extra width to the fiddle yard has been a worthwhile effort. I've got an extra 4 sidings in there, and it's certainly allowed me to store a couple of extra trains, and in fact I've got a couple of items downstairs in the collection that I've not run for ages, and now I have suitable space to store those up here. So it'll be nice to get a couple of other bits and pieces running on the layout over the next few weeks. As you can see, these little hedge shunt sidings at the end are proving very useful. I need to lengthen a couple of them by a few mil, but you can see just allows me to get a couple of items off the layout, a few locos out of storage, just gives me a bit more flexibility when running trains up here. It's only been a day or so since I've got everything wired up, and I'm still very much in the testing phase, but I'm happy to report that there basically haven't been any derailments at all, and everything seems to be running really nicely over the new streamlined track work and those more gentle curves going into the yard. You can see I've also got those head shunt sidings at the other end, which is just very nice for storing a few locos and DMUs out of the yard on the scenic part of the layout. It just makes things look a little bit less cluttered. As you can see, those Cavalex TEAs now run absolutely fine, no trouble at all over those streamlined points. There's also 1 or 2 new additions to the layout since you last saw it. These aren't new locos per se, they're replacement body shells for chassis that I already had. It's quite a nice cost-effective way of sort of refreshing something on the layout whilst not having to spend £200+ on a new locomotive. So this Class 37 is a chassis that I already had with a metal sector body attached to it. That metal sector Class 37 was a little bit out of era, as it was a model of the loco in preservation in the 21st century. So I picked up this body shell from an engineer's Class 37, and this particular loco was stationed in the region that I model, and it was in this colour during the time period that I modelled. So it's a really nice fit for the layout, and as I said, I already had the chassis, so I've only spent about 40 odd pounds on the replacement body shell. Nice way of getting a new loco on the layout without having to fork out for a whole new model. Similar story over here. This is a chassis of a Class 47 that I already had. It was a model called Firefly, which I bought probably 6 or 7 years ago now. I only paid about £80 for it at the time. Firefly had white wheels, silver buffers, hauled the royal train, all the fancy sort of stuff. Not really what I'm into, so I didn't run it very often, and as such it's been off the layout for quite a while. I managed to pick up this replacement body shell in the petroleum sector livery, and I also purchased the necessary spare parts such as battery boxes and buffer beam to convert the chassis into the correct model for this particular Class 47. So once again, I've almost gained myself a new locomotive, and I've spent less than £60. So it's something I quite like to do occasionally. I'll change the bodies up on some of the locos that I have in the collection. So there you go. That's the Fiddle Yard project now pretty much complete. I've obviously still got a little bit more wiring to do and a little bit more testing, but so far I'm really pleased. It was a lot of work and I didn't want to do it in all honesty, but certainly worth it in the end. Everything seems to run that much sweeter. Those troublesome issues with various items of rolling stock have now gone away, and I feel more confident now about future releases being able to run nicely on this layout. Perhaps the biggest win out of this project has been these Hornby Sea Cow and Sea Lion hoppers. As I mentioned earlier in the video, these were rendered practically unusable when I converted them to hunt couplings. They're already a tricky wagon to run on some layouts. They do have a bit of a reputation, but when I added those magnetic couplers to make them look more scale, it completely destroyed their ability to navigate those tight pico points, and derailment was pretty much constant. So I haven't run these for a long time, and it's nice to get them back onto the layout. So I'll leave you with some shots of some trains running, as we haven't had a bit of a running session on the channel for quite a while, and I'll be back obviously as soon as I can when I've made progress on the next project, which most likely is going to be some weathering, as again I haven't covered weathering on the channel for a few months now.